Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to see you today. This is Martha Novak, and this is a show called Real Talk with Martha Novak. Said person. Guys, I am thrilled to talk with you about an important subject called the feelings of abandonment. We're going to really look at that in all sorts of ways, and as usual, talk about what will get you out of this. I think that's a really important topic in this day and time when people seem to be so disenfranchised, not only from each other, but from themselves in many cases. So I think we better talk about this in all detail. Pulled a couple of good articles too we'll be quoting from. Guys, I hope you're doing well. The big news around here is I think we're moving. I say I think we're moving because there are a few little factors in the way. I think we might just be buying another house and it's nearby, so that's great. That said, I may have to skip a week or two here and there. I think next Sunday I probably will have to skip if we are still showing the house and that kind of thing. So hang on, I promise I'll be back, but there are only like 150 of these shows, so by all means listen to some of them on the topic of your choosing, because we've got a lot of shows. I've been doing this now for how many years? A great number of years. I did it in Atlanta before we moved. That was 5 years ago, and so I was doing it years before that. So if you count almost every Sunday of doing this, that's a lot of shows to talk to and get through. Anyway, I hope you're doing well. I see you all clicking on now. I'm so glad. All right, let's do a prayer. Get us all on the same page. Actually, get me on the same page with you, and we'll go forward. This is a live show, and if you want to talk to me directly, the guest call-in number is 347-850-1647. That'll get you on the air. Please know that. It will get you on the air. Okay. Dear God, thank you so much for the opportunity for all of us to be here together under the banner of loving you, wanting to know more about you as who we are, and opening ourselves completely to that information and that knowledge and that truth. We know we're in our own ways, in a lot of different ways. We ask that we be aware, our awareness be turned on right now so we can hear what is being said, that we can recognize if something is something that we need to hear and need to work on, that you will allow us the gift of that kind of clarity so we see that. And we now ask that we say in all truth we know nothing, because it is the you through us and through all things that know everything. And we open to that kind of truth now and face it head on because it is all for our good and all for our joy. We understand that life just keeps getting better and better if we will let it. So what we're talking about today, I think, is one of the real reasons that we don't let it. Touch us, dear God, and touch our hearts that we may understand what we must do to heal. We thank you so much for all of this, dear God, and we say this prayer now in your name, in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of all of our listeners. And so it is. Amen. All right, kiddos. So the first article that I pulled was, what does the feeling of abandonment represent in psychology? This was written by Alexa Clark, who is a specialist in cognitive behavioral therapy. So it is certainly written from a therapist's point of view, and I think she brings up some very good points. And then we're going to go into another article that are 6 signs of the abandonment schema. And what the schema is, and I should tell you that, is When something happens in a repetitive manner over and over to us, our conscious minds make the decision that this is just what life is, that this is what life is all about, and that we can't think of anything else, and that, thinking of anything else will bring us disappointment. This is the way it is. We accept this as, think of it as a life pattern. We accept it. Spirit just told me we accept it as a life sentence. Well, it's true. The good thing about this is through energy work, you see, our behaviors and our beliefs and our attitudes, everything is energy. That's the reason I'm in the work I do, because if we can change the energy, you change what you believe, you change your attitudes about things, and your behavior changes, you see? That's why I do what I do for a living. I find it very powerful, or I wouldn't do it. So I want you all to know I don't just teach. I work hard on the individual, certainly in my practice. And so do all the people that I've trained that are also doing this work. You remember that certainly part of our job is to make you happy with your life and resolve certain things. But we differ from psychology in several different ways. First of all, by our methodology of the emphasis on energy. But it is also different because our end result is not the same. We're not satisfied with just having you feel better, although that's wonderful, and I'm delighted that you do, and you do as you go through this. But we are interested in your joining the conscious community and opening your mind and being enormously aware of what's going on around you, and adding that to this world. What a wonderful, wonderful thing you are adding to the world when you are wise, you see? Okay. So what makes us unwise or emotionally immature? Well, what makes us unwise and emotionally immature are our issues, which served us beautifully. You shouldn't beat yourself up about them. That's the problem. Somebody might feel abandoned, and then they beat themselves up for feeling abandoned when they have a perfectly good reason, and they ought to look at that, and they ought to get through it. This beating yourself up over and over again doesn't accomplish anything for anybody. And it actually entrenches what you're trying to get out of. So it's time now for us to wake up to how to get out of these things, and beating yourself up is not the way. The fact of the matter is, when you were a kid, and I'm talking about before you're 7 or 8 years old, you needed an advocate. And sometimes our parents are our advocates, and sometimes they are not. First of all, I don't think they really ever fully are, and there's a reason for that. It's because they're not supposed to know who you are. You're supposed to know who you are. Isn't that something? We go through life trying to find somebody to recognize us, somebody to understand us, and that's at the expense of you understanding yourself. That's where the power is. That's where God is. That's where your health and your healing is, in understanding yourself. Okay? So when I pull these articles, I'm always going to launch off. Sorry, but I just do. I'm going to launch off into what I am most interested in for you, and that is a conscious attitude, a real wisdom, and an emotional maturity, and you're moving into that. Certainly, I've had all the issues that everybody else does. I really have. And I'm still working on things from time to time. It's much easier than it's ever been because there's not so much. So I want you all to know the conscious journey, especially when you emphasize energy and change it from that perspective. You see, when you change it from that perspective, it's the bottom line, isn't it? And things don't change if you're not at the bottom line. Do you understand that? They're not going to change unless you're at the bottom line. So I am always interested in the bottom line, and faster, deeper, better for you and for me. And here we go. All right. So this is an article by Alexa Clark, as I mentioned. What does the feeling of abandonment represent in psychology? She goes on to say, the dependence, psychological, physiological, social, and material, is fulfilled from the moment the fetus begins to form in the womb. I'm so glad she said that. But then she goes on to say, however, the abandonment of parental care, even without awareness of it on their parts, becomes even more evident from birth of the infant, becoming a social problem with profound repercussions on the psychological and physiological development of the infant. Yes, yes, yes. Now, here's what I want to say about that. Actually, I think everything starts in the womb. You've heard me lecture on this before, so I'm not going to take tons of time, but I want to put this on the table right now, and I want us to go from this premise, if indeed you can accept it. And that is, when your mother has feelings and you are in gestation, what is going on there is you're receiving chemicals from her body that you may or may not understand, because what does a child understand? They're just undeveloped love. They understand love. They understand caring. They understand that they're about to be born, that this is their family, and that this is, they should be nurtured and protected and cared for. All right. So if that doesn't happen in the womb, okay, and guys, here's something so interesting to me. I've had a lot of pregnant women in my care through the years, and it's so interesting how they come in and they don't like their feet swelling, and they're miserable in their pregnancy, and they've got horrible morning sickness, and it's all awful. And do you realize what that's doing to a kid? The kid is telling you what it needs, even in the womb. For example, one of my dear clients was somebody who had not worked through all her issues. And for certainly she liked to go all the time, and she wasn't going to let her pregnancy interfere with that. She had really bad morning sickness, because you have to work as a team when you're pregnant. You have to see what you need. You have to do it, because it's about you and the child. And I think that we can minimize a lot of morning sickness and everything else if we're just listening and realizing that. You understand? But many people don't. Whether a mother is happy in her marriage, whether or not she tells her husband she's having a baby and they go, oh, this is awful. How are we going to pay for this kid? Or anything else that can happen, okay? And her frustrations, everything comes into that child. Don't you get it? Everything comes into that child. Everything starts in the womb. Now, a child who is nothing but undeveloped love goes, I don't understand this chemical. I don't get this. Now, of course, they're not using their cognitive mind. There's no cognitive mind. All of this is in energy, right? Nevertheless, they don't understand it because it's not the energy of love. And so what the child does is it kind of boxes it and puts it over here and says, when I'm born, I'm going to understand this. I'm using words, of course, that are not accurate because this is not a cognitive process, but the only way we understand it is by cognitive process in words. But this is all energy. So you got all these things that you didn't understand in the womb. So you get born, and what she says occurs. Then you start looking for explanations to these things that you did not understand that you experienced in the womb. And that's why your pattern can be completely different from your brothers and sisters. Okay, you're all looking for different things depending on what mother's experience was and what your experience was with the mother. You understand this now, right? You can see the world completely differently. You're looking for different explanations to things that you felt there. All right. And this is why you see the world a certain way. And these are often your issues. Okay? And this is there as part of God's divine plan, because they're the thrust for you to get to the larger mind and the higher self, which is why you listen to a show like this. You get it. That's how it works. That's how it works. Now, of course, I'm simplifying, but that's how it works. Okay. This article goes on to say that the feeling of abandonment can occur at any stage of a person's life. Yes, it can. It's going to be particularly bad if you had it in your childhood. That's when it is very difficult. I've often said that when you get angry in present time, or when you get frustrated in present time, or when you fear in present time, or whatever happens, sadness in present time, the reason it's so intense, well, hello, Jay. Jay said he's here to support me. He did not abandon me. I'm so glad. And that's really good. Let's talk about the difference with rejection and abandonment. Rejection, Jay is asking, what's the difference between rejection and abandonment? Rejection is something that is an action, and abandonment is a feeling within the individual. Okay? You can be, yes, we can say our parents abandoned us, but when we're working, it is the abandonment issue in us that we believe in that is the problem, you see? And I think of rejection is more the action that might bring forth abandonment feelings. You get it? Although I'm going to use these words all differently, and sometimes I'm going to almost use them interchangeably, but that is what I feel. Rejection is what somebody does to you, and so is abandonment. But I think the real definition of abandonment here is what exists within you, what you believe in, and what you're putting energy into. Okay, thank you, sweetheart. The figure of abandonment by itself is related to a lot of psychology. Abandonment schema runs through almost everything that, and certainly a lot of psychological and DSM issues. Things like deprivation and aggression and frustration, they can all certainly have their roots in abandonment. The feeling of abandonment, she goes on to say, and this is Alexa Clark, the feeling of abandonment is defined as a syndrome that manifests itself in the lack of underlying emotional security, linked to early experiences of loss, which occurred in early stages of someone's development. In other words, when you're very, 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 very young. Would you like me to repeat that? I will. The feeling of abandonment is defined as a syndrome that manifests itself in the lack of underlying emotional security, linked to early experiences of loss, which occurred in the early stages of an individual's life. And here I am launching off again. What is loss? Well, it could be a parent that's lost. It could be a friend that's lost. It could be the loss of self-esteem, and it could be the loss of self. I work with a lot of people who have no sense of self at all. Depending on what happened to them, if they got the feeling, if they're convinced of the belief that they don't matter, that is a loss of self. You understand? Okay, good. So, moving right along, the syndrome appears after prolonged and consistent experience of deprivation. Let's talk about this as repetition. That's an easy way to understand it. If this pattern was repeated in your life, if your mother never paid attention to you or always criticized you every day, if your father had nothing to do with you, these are repeated patterns, you see? And if it is a prolonged and consistent experience, a repetition of deprivation of the consoling presence of parents and their loving attitude, you might want to look at the abandonment schema. She goes on to say, and this is true, that as a consequence of that, a state of adaptive suppression, what is suppressed? We'll talk about that in a minute. A state of adaptive suppression occurs by which the subject's social behavior is affected. So what's suppressed? Well, many things can be suppressed. Your trust of other people. You can you can totally suppress your entire emotional body and all your emotions and the expression of emotions, because emotion is consisting of two things. One is having it, and the second is expressing it. All right, those things can be entirely limited or one or the other. This is a suppression of who you are, what you want. Oh, hello. This is my cat. I'm sorry. His name is Schnitzel, and Schnitzel is a fine boy who always comes to these meetings. Okay, he's usually here for everybody's session too. He likes the work. Okay. Suppression can be anything. And the suppressions occur because you have learned that you can't, for example, express your feelings in your home because your father and mother are so emotional there was no room for you. That's a good, certainly will teach you that you don't matter, right? That nobody listens to you, that you have nothing to say is something that you could do with that. I could go on about this one subject of suppressions for 1,000 years. The fact is, we all have our way of adapting, you see, but the adaptation to dysfunction is also dysfunction. Adaptation to dysfunction is always dysfunction. So we simply have to look at what you've done and break these old patterns and change the beliefs underneath. Can't break the old patterns until you have changed the beliefs underneath. So we got to find out what they are. She goes on to say that the importance given to psychoanalysis, by psychoanalysis, to maternal deprivation by your mom, related to the temporary or perennial absence of the figure of the mother, or its neglect with reference to food, daily care, and affection, is indisputable. They have done tons of research on this. When the deprivation is habitual or the absence is intermittent but chronic, the emotional and intellectual development of the infant are terrifically wounding. She goes on to say that in adult life they can be manageable. I say in adult life you can turn them around with enough work energetically. I really do think you can. My clientele, now you keep in mind our wounds are in various degrees. I want to put that on the table. The tragedy here to me, but I actually am pulling myself back from that word because it's not a tragedy unless I'm being judgmental, right? So you just caught me in that. I caught myself in that. People have a right to live and die the way they want to. So if they don't get help for this, that's a choice, honeys. They have a right to that. Doing what I do, seeing people change, over time, oh my word, the change we see when we change the energy is remarkable. But everybody has a right to do what they're doing. And I believe that with all my heart. And that's what I get to in the end, isn't it? When I use a word like tragedy, it's like, no, everybody has a right to live and die the way they choose. And I wouldn't want anybody interfering with the way I do it. You wouldn't want anybody interfering in the way you do it. So there we are. But what a divine blessing it is for us to realize we have options all around us to get healthy and well. You do not have to stay in this old deprivation. You just don't. In this old abandonment. She goes on to say, it should be understood that the feeling of abandonment can occur in other situations of adult life, such as divorces between couples, separation due to migration, separation between children and parents, close relatives, or forced distancing from the elderly. Even an individual may feel abandoned by society itself. And what I often see is the abandonment of self. I want to say one thing and insert one thing here too. One of the things that I very much see with people, not all people, but some to more or less degrees, is the fact that they will want you and they want to have a relationship with you and they love you, but they push you away. You know, they're just kind of replaying the childhood that they had. It's very frustrating from the person being pushed away. I had a girlfriend, very, very close girlfriend, who died pushing people away. Except right there at the end, in her last month, she let us all in, and we all said how much we loved her. And I had hoped that she would certainly do that throughout her life. What she did was she drank instead, and she was ashamed of that. It made me a little sad because, and this is something that happens to me from time to time, I become, once people have worked with me a long time, the voice of their own conscience. So they may not want to see me, even though I'm not saying anything to them and I'm not judging them. Because I had to make a decision early on in this experience with her that I could judge her and possibly move away from her, but that I would love her. I chose the latter after going through some soul searching. But she still was very ashamed of what she was doing. And she had chosen to live that way and to die that way. And she did. So, you know, at the end, it was a wonderful experience of all of us saying how much we loved each other and how grateful we were to have everybody in everybody's life. Okay. Now she goes on to talk about, so what I wanted to put on the table with that story is you can have somebody who, and maybe you too, by the way, who's filled with abandonment issues, who wants connection and yet pushes it away at the same time. Because, first of all, how can they trust it when they've been abandoned that way? You see? How can they trust it? It's not even about you. It feels about you, doesn't it? When you are the one being pushed away, it feels about you. But it's not about you. It's about their ability to trust love itself. Okay. Characteristics of the feelings of abandonment. Certainly the feeling of abandonment, she says, is related to the rupture or absence of the emotional bond between individuals, which is regularly accompanied by the abandonment of material or moral commitments and results in feelings of frustration. In other words, excuse me for translating her, but I think she doesn't talk like a regular person in this article. In other words, if you your needs have not been met materially, like being fed, or certainly a moral, she calls it a moral commitment. I call it a natural commitment, like a mother loving a child. You certainly have feelings that are frustrated. The emotional wound is the most characteristic consequence of abandonment. It manifests itself in organic dysfunctions, in problems of adaptation to the environment, and aggressive and antisocial personalities and behaviors. And it's interesting because I have friends who have worked with little kids before. They're clients of mine who are preschool teachers, and they say you often see the abandonment schema in little tiny 5 and 6-year-old kids. They are not socialized. They're not adapting well. There are certain characteristics, we'll talk about them, that they see, you know. The feelings of sadness and restlessness that a child experiences can arise only from affective inattention, even if his material needs are covered. In fact, emotional neglect refers to disinterest by the parent, or coldness and apathy on the part of parents or guardians. Someone who is more interested in their career than in their own child qualifies, you see. Emotional neglect is related to dysfunctional families, where there is no clear definition of roles, for example. I mean, you can have a child be the parent instead of the parent being the parent. You've seen that many times. Perhaps that was your experience. You can have extremist parents. Those extremist parents can be dominant or carefree. There are the castrators. Now, these are parents who do not value the ability of their children. And you can have demanding parents who demand more than their children can give, probably because they're too young to give it. I've told all of you all about the story of the parent that was very upset. She didn't drive well anyway, and she was on the expressway, and she had to go pick up her husband who'd had an accident. It's pouring rain, it's midnight, and she has her 4-year-old standing in the seat beside her and screaming at her to read the signs, and the child couldn't read. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, so let's talk about each of these that we've just mentioned, because I think those are quite brilliant, the way she defined them. Authoritarian parents or guardians have pre-established, unchangeable, and non-negotiable rules which are imposed on the child from the start. They show insensitivity to their children's emotional responses and expressive needs, and they just want to be obeyed. What did I see the other day? And somebody was saying they were rearing God-fearing children. God-fearing children. And I thought, wow, that's sad to me, because God is a God of love. You're going to find that out. I've been lucky enough to experience that. I didn't have a pre-death experience, but I certainly have gone several places in my life that are available to us to go. Had a lot of very incredible spiritual experiences. And I have experienced the light that you have to look away from, because our physical beings can't take that much light and that much love. I am going to tell you that God is nothing but love. That little old adage is true. And it's overwhelming, and you're going to feel that perhaps in your meditations, but certainly you're going to feel it more intensely when you have one of these experiences or even are close to leaving. Nobody stays here, you see, in death because we want to go. If you think that the ego will save you, ego, child's mind, like you think it's always done because you have not done your work on yourself, you'll linger. But let me tell you, love will win, okay? The behavior of individuals, she goes on to say, and I think this is quite important, the behavior of individuals raised under such strict parameters as we're describing right now end up in the confirmation of similar behaviors, which they replicate with their own children. Number 2, they act against authority. Or number 3, they become timid and dependent. And you may have a mixture of all 3 of those things. When parents or guardians, let's go to the next one, are carefree and lax about basic guidelines and the upbringing of minors, the existential loss of infants occur. Excessive freedom is assimilated by them, the baby, as disinterest in their lives. The parents are disinterested. Boy, there's a setup for I don't matter, don't you think? And of course, all of these behaviors all of a sudden start showing when you're raising your own children, when you're rearing them. I remember sitting in the car, I remember exactly where I was with a girlfriend of mine who was desperately trying to get pregnant. And I said, don't you think we ought to work on your self-esteem before you have this baby? Because that's going to be really important. They learn from you. Let's talk about the castration. Castrating parents regularly, castrating people had castrating parents. That's what I want to say. Castration is within the scope of children's abilities and potential, whether due to authoritarianism, neglect of responsibilities, parental narcissism, or a search for perfection. Certainly I've seen this in my work. I work with a family whose children I work with as well. They're all adults now. And I work with the mother and father and the kids. So I've had the dynamic right in my face for years. And it's really interesting because this mother, to have something, and she's a bit of a narcissist, so let's put that on the table, or was, whether it was narcissism or whether it was her relentless pursuit of perfection, which there is none, by the way. The perfection is in God, not in us. You know, it's only there in this magnificent system. The child would try to do something, draw, paint, make puppets, do what, and she'd come along and do it with them and do a better one. And then she would constantly give them what she called constructive criticism about all the things they did wrong and how they could do better. Now, that's a castrating parent. You understand? It can be that they are so the authority that they tell you what to do. That's another one. They can simply neglect their responsibilities. I have another friend who had a parent that gave them great presents, but they never once came to one of their recitals. Not once. Not once. They didn't support that at all. They didn't support anything the kid did. But they gave them great presents on the holidays. Okay, that's how they did it. Well, it just doesn't give you security, does it? To me, it isn't the parents that give us presents that's important. They need to instill us with what everybody should have gotten, which is security and love, and you're good at that. You're good at that. Good. Let's see where you go with it. I think that's wonderful. Great. The need for constant correction. The limitless demand. The search for perfection in all children's activities, demanded by parents, leads to internal conflicts, exhaustion, and the feeling of loneliness. Hey, Michelle, you know what? You're right. She says, Mommy dearest. I think that's become such a trope these days, don't you think? Mommy dearest. But it's true, from hearing little Christina, whatever her name was, that was Joan Crawford's daughter. She described a lot of this. Mm-hmm. So I do think when I see clients with parents like this, it leads to a lot of conflicting emotions, exhaustion, and feelings of loneliness. Why? Because they've abandoned themselves along the way. The parent never did say, you're good at this. Keep going with that. That's great. You're good at this and this and this. I'm not good at that. Instead, what they do is they say, I'm better at this than you are. Now, that may be implied because I don't know many malicious parents. There are out there, by the way. But the people that I see don't have the malicious parents. They have the parents that just were clueless, completely unaware of what their activities, their actions, and what they said even meant. Okay. We got to be aware. All right, guys. The need for constant correction, as I said, I want to read this line again because I didn't go through the whole paragraph, which is a very good one. The limitless demand, the search for perfection in all children's activities, the demanded by the parents lead to internal conflicts, exhaustion, and a feeling of loneliness. I'll also say emptiness. I'm adding that. In the long run, people are tormented about not being able to reach beyond their real capacities. So part of good parenting, I think, is to have the child recognize what they're good at, but don't challenge them to do more than is age appropriate. You see? We have to be real about ourselves, don't we? I mean, I'm thinking of a time when I did a lot of acting, which I don't do anymore. I'm a writer now. But when I acted, I was very aware because I'm 4'10½", probably shorter now in my age. I look rather unusual. I'm not the classic anything. That I could play ingenues on the stage, like Eliza Doolittle and Molly Brown and Annie Get Your Gun. I was good. I have a character for that because these people were characters, right? Okay. But I was not, as I aged, going to be as popular until I was the dirty talking little old lady like, what was the woman, Betty White, that just passed away, you see? Because I was different. We have to understand that. We have to understand that we're different. We have to think of this realistically about ourselves. I used to see actors very much who would come in and they'd be very much in the character mode. They'd have a great look. They almost a little villainish, they'd have such, and they all wanted to be Brad Pitt. It was like, wake up, you're not going to be Brad Pitt. Let's put it on the table, But boy, can you have a great career with what your look is. So all of us have to be realistic about everything. There's a great article. I've even done a radio show on this. It's called The 8 Intelligences. You all look this up because you've got 3 or 4 of them. I think everybody has 3 and a minor one. And those are the things you ought to be exploiting about yourself. You bet. Moving along. Physical absence is one of the most common causes of the appearance of abandonment syndrome or schema. Michelle, oh, aren't you sweet? My gosh. Thank you, Michelle. That's very sweet of you to say. I think she likes me just as I am. That's the most wonderful thing that anybody can say to you. Just love you the way you are. Thank you. And that goes double, okay? It's very sweet. Physical absence is one of the most common causes of the appearance of the abandonment syndrome. The reason for such absences, of course, are multiple. So you can have children of divorced parents who must live with the father and mother, or create a second home formed by the father or the mother with their new partner. The emotional pain, excuse me a minute, there's no one in my house to call down the dog but me. Toffle, thank you. And that was not made by a squirrel, but by a dog who's barking out there somewhere. And I heard him too. So my dog is perfectly within his rights to bark. But we are doing a radio show, so come on. All right. We talked about divorce. It could be one of the reasons for physical absence. The emotional pain it generates and described by people. They almost describe it as an existential emptiness. It's like, why am I here? Who am I? Where am I going? What am I even doing? Now, all of us feel that way from time to time, by the way. Those are questions we should be asking as we transition through life. But this is beyond to that. This is something that pretty much stays with you. At an early stage, we said you can even see this in children, usually from about 5 to 12 years old. Some traits of this habitual way of thinking and the conflict within emotionally certainly is there. Also, their frustration level, their not wanting to conform, that's kind of a clue too. All right, moving along. The emotional abandonment suffered in childhood will be expressed in different ways in adult life. According to Alexa Clark, here are some of those things. Number one, the individual lacks emotional intelligence. He is not able to identify his emotions and those of others. And that's just really important. Guys, you have a fine mental experience, you have a fine physical body, and you have a fine emotional body. If you lack in any of those arenas without paying attention to that, you are lacking some of your intelligence. So we're talking about emotional intelligence here, and you've got radio shows out the wazzola on that, by the way. You can look them up on YouTube, on Blog Talk Radio and Facebook Live. They're all archived for you to listen to at your leisure, and all of them are free. When we lack emotional intelligence, we're suppressing emotion. And one of the things I always say is go to a computer and look up and find the longest list of emotions that you can find. Print that out. And if you don't have an emotional vocabulary, which you should have, that's the first step. Then you can look at that list and define how you feel. Now, one of the things I want you to remember as an aware person, though, is there are only two emotions in the world. There's fear and there's love. Hate's actually not security is not the opposite of fear. Love is the opposite of fear. Okay? Because these are the bottom lines to the ego child's mind, fear-based, the higher self mind, love-based. Okay? Those are your two categories. Everything on that list should fall in one category or the other, fear-based or love-based, or both, depending on whether you're in the ego child's mind or whether you're in the higher self mind. Isn't that interesting? For example, if I choose something like, let's choose selfishness. Okay, let's choose that state of being, selfishness. Okay, if I am selfish, I am in the ego child's mind. But if I am selfish in the higher self mind, it becomes the right thing to do, that you have to think of yourself as well as others, you see? So some of these words are in both categories. The fact is, don't just pull that sheet out and say, what am I feeling when you're mad as hell? Although that's a good exercise, because when people come in and say, this angered me, I say, all right, what are the elements of anger there that you felt? Now, this is not something I do with everybody. Most of the people I've worked with for 20 years or more. and they already know the words. This is not the beginner, but if it's the beginner, what is when you say I'm mad, what does that consist of? What are all the words that consists of? You see? And that's how to start making yourself more emotionally intelligent. I think it's not just when you're experiencing high drama and high emotion that list is important. I think it's fine when you're sitting here listening to me. I think it's fine when you're quiet and meditative, or feeding the cats, or talking to a friend. I think that sheet becomes imperative for you to become more nuanced in your ability to name your emotions. You have to identify your emotions before you can express them. Do you understand? Otherwise, the expression comes out as rage, comes out as a tantrum in many cases. You see? Okay. Number 2 of her characteristics, the person repeatedly experiences feelings of emptiness without being able to make any sense of it. I often have clients that come in and they'll say to, oh, there's the cutest little hummingbird right outside my window. They'll say to me, I just feel so empty, and yet I have a great life. A great life. I'm happily married. I have a beautiful home. I've got everything I need materially. I've got great kids. I've got a good community. Why I feel so empty. Okay? In one of my clients' cases, she feels useless. She's an enormously talented person, but she doesn't use those talents except in the most limited way. Oh, she'll cook a great dinner. She'll give a fine party. But in terms of her creativity to express her true self, forget it. She doesn't have time for that. And she constantly says, I'm so empty. And I say, it's because you feel so useless. Part of the healing of everything, darlings, is, I think it's twofold. I think it is about knowing yourself, about self-awareness and self-actualization, getting a full knowledge of yourself, meeting a lot of those own needs, and then being able to express this in some way to the world. We all have our different ways of expression. And how to find yours? Well, go back and look at the 8 intelligences that I've told you about. That is a marvelous article. Those are the things you should exploit. You will not have all 8. And it's interesting because I have 3 strong ones and one that is semi-strong, and the rest of them, you can just write me off. I'm not going to be able to do it. Not going to be able to do it. I just don't do those things well. Okay? All right. The third point here. The person is fragile in the face of any situation that comes his way. He is regularly overwhelmed by the situations he must face. If the new rattles you, if, a lot of times what happens is people that have abandonment issues plan things, fantasize the way it's going to be, and then something comes along and it's not that way, and they freak out because it's not that way. And the whole point is to be a good improviser in the moment. Life is an improvisation, isn't it? Some people are better able to improvise than others, but I'll tell you what, I encourage everybody to take an improvisation class at your local theater. It's tons of fun, and it frees up your mind. You can't be judgmental and have a good improvisation. You have to stay in the moment. You have to listen. You see? You have to just be inspired in the moment and let God through. And man, it's a real spiritual exercise, I think. Just a suggestion. You are much more capable than these issues are allowing you to be. You understand that? If you are easily overwhelmed by situations you must face, your mind is locked into, these are my options, and you don't see all the options. So that's what energy work does, is it allows you to see, I've got tons of choices here. I'm not ready to make these yet. I had a client not long ago who would say, okay, I see my options, but I can't do that yet. And that tells me what I need to work on, right? That's all. It's as easy as that. And by the way, as hard as that. Okay. All right. The next point is the individual usually suffers from low self-esteem. Well, why wouldn't you have it if you're not balanced in yourself? If you're still abandoning yourself in some way, why wouldn't you have low self-esteem? Why wouldn't you know what to do? If you're telling yourself all the time that you don't matter, then you're telling yourself you don't matter to you. And you do. Every single one of you needs to be the sun in your solar system. Do you understand that? Nobody else should be the center of your solar system. You should be that. That doesn't mean that you don't radiate out to everybody. Of course you do. You give that love away. You express yourself beautifully to people. You give it as much as you can in your ways, in the ways of your four intelligences. But for God's sake, darlings, having somebody else here, and I see this all the time, they'll have their dead mother in the center of their solar system. They're still working under her laws and rules that aren't even theirs. How do you expect to be happy if you don't find yourself and put yourself there? Don't you understand? That's the way it's supposed to work. It's the right thing to do. Okay? That's not at the expense of other people. Listen to me. That's you taking care of yourself and giving to others because you take care of yourself and you have more to give. It's key to life, isn't it? And happiness. Okay. The next point she makes is you can go to the extreme wanting to show yourself to your audience as a perfectionist. You know, I coach a lot of businesses, and in those businesses, I coach them to interview people well. And the moment an interviewee says, I'm a perfectionist, throw them out. Don't hire those people. You're going to have trouble with them. That's not a good thing to be. If somebody is so unaware to say, I'm a perfectionist, that's not a good thing, guys. There is no perfection. If you look for your divinity and your consciousness, this is in your imperfection, because the acceptance of your imperfection and who you are opens the door to your divinity and who God really is in you and the aspect of you that you are. That's the journey to deeper consciousness. Okay? So this is not about being a perfectionist. Oh, we all want to do things well. I hope we all have a good work ethic, but that's different from being a perfectionist. Perfectionist is impossible. It's a high standard. It is an unaware parent that created that in you. Now, wake up and get beyond that. I'm so thrilled because I've had lots of perfectionists in my clientele for years, and they're all relaxed now. They're all balanced. They do their fine work, but it's not about being a perfectionist. And here's the thing: the moment I work on you in a private session, and I have to be a perfectionist, I'm thinking of me. I'm not thinking of you. So that has to go. That cannot be part of therapy. You understand? Good. Okay. Her next point is the person tends to show a strong sensitivity to the rejection of others. And this is true. I mean, abandonment, as Jay pointed out, abandonment and rejection kind of go hand in hand. So somebody can reject you. If you have abandonment issues here, darling, you're going to take it much worse than somebody else who would just go, well, that wasn't pleasant, but you let it roll off your back. And you know yourself enough to say, that's true, that isn't true, this is the little thing I can take for that, this is what they're trying to tell me. Okay? But if it's the end of the world for somebody with an abandonment schema, do you understand? Best to get over the abandonment schema. You can't hide from the world, honeys. We want you to be a full participant. That means work on yourself. It does. That's what it means. Okay. The next point was the adult subject shows distrust. Yep. And is not clear about what he expects of himself and what others expect from him. That is absolutely true. But you see, they distrust other people, but they distrust themselves. It's if your significant parents or guardians reared you and they were untrustworthy, I'm going to even take it further into my arena. At one point in your development, when you're very, very young, the only thing you know of God is your mother and your father. So you're going to transfer all of that to what you think about God is, what you think God is. And at some point in our consciousness work, you got to wake up and go, God isn't that. God has nothing to do with being judgmental or fearsome. Raising a God-fearing child, dear God, that's ridiculous. You want to rear a balanced, kind, good person who contributes to society. You want to create a child that loves God and knows how the energy works, of the energy of God works in his life, and knows that he is part of this marvelous energy. Oh, for heaven's sakes, we get so screwed up, don't we? All right. Nevertheless, dears, you've got to learn to trust. And you're not going to get that in the beginning of therapy. I'm going to tell you right now. That is something that you learn to do as you get your issues off. You learn to trust yourself more. And you learn to be discerning enough to spot trustworthy people to be friends with. It's a wonderful thing. Her last point is, in the role as father or mother, people that have this abandonment schema tend to be elusive and unloving towards their own children, which would imply the continuation, the replication of learned behavior. In other words, if you don't address this, it comes around again. Okay. Certainly, guys, we see abandonment schema in those who have been orphaned, or in the situations of family breakdown due to drug addiction or alcoholism or something like that, forced migration, divorce, as already mentioned, death. But it can be in normal lives too. And I want to talk about that a minute. Adults who have gone through more or less constant episodes of what we're talking about right now, in their first few years of life. I'm sorry, I've got to yell at the dog. Would you excuse me for just a minute? Toffle, quiet. Quiet. Is there someone there?
It's me.
Hey, darling, come on in.
Are you still?
Yep, I'm doing the show. We're moving, and all my darling friends have come to help me. And holy Moses, if you could see what I'm living in right now, Box City. All right. That's what Toffle was barking at. I've got the greatest friends in the world. You are part of them, by the way. If adults have gone through, to more or less extent, by the way, what we're talking about right now, in their first years of life, often they have problems with trying to establish lasting, effective bonds. They are suspicious. They feel vulnerable. They are sometimes apathetic. When we care too much and we have told ourselves we're not going to get something, that's where the apathy comes from. Do you realize you're not really apathetic? You want so badly, and you believe, you are convinced you'll never get it. You see. Jay says, my dog may be feeling abandoned. And the truth is, he does by his mama. Yes, as a matter of fact, if you can't abandon somebody when you're moving, when can you do it, right? All right. In addition, she goes on to say, and this is an important point, codependency and the need to receive approval from others are often recurrent in this abandonment schema. They don't find a balance. These people don't find a balance between feelings they invest in others and those they finally receive. I know a lot of people will overgive without a fair exchange. I know a lot of people will withhold everything, and they don't give and receive anything, or very little, I should say. They withhold. You cannot keep protecting yourself from life, ladies and gentlemen. You must heal from the early experiences. That energy turns into deepening talents and gifts and abilities. Hi, Shelley. Oh, she says she understands moving. That's wonderful. I thank you. Yeah, I hope all this goes through. If it does not go through, this being able to buy this next house, we will be living in an empty house and out of boxes. It will be not good. So we are certainly hoping to pull all this together. There are some complications along the way. Be glad to tell you about them another time, but now is not the time. Okay. So that the codependency is, and you can read all about that. We can do a radio show. I think I have done a radio show on that at some point along the lines. But that's an imbalance of a relationship. It's an imbalance of energy exchange. So we have to find the balance between what we're putting out and what we're receiving. That's really important. The abandonment syndrome can appear recurrently due to some stimulus, situation, or an external agent. When this happens, the person tends to return to the state of inaction and deep wound and whatever they're feeling there, apathy or hurt or sadness or upset, overwhelm. Because, guys, we've got to realize that these things were tied to some sort of post-traumatic stress. People on the battlefield are not the only ones experiencing this terrible experience. If you've just had a bad childhood, you're also experiencing that. So there are triggers that will trigger us right back into feeling the way we did. You may have a cold coworker at the next desk, and this coworker or this boss may make you think of your mother and your father. We tend to take jobs that way. May I put that on the table? That whatever is not resolved in our childhood is often played out at work. And you may think you've got a great new job, and you are there 2 to 3 months, and let me tell you, there it is again. The family situation is there. Well, you can't run away from it. The only thing you can do is heal from it. That's what I'm putting on the table. And she goes on to say concerning all of this, emotional conditioning in your early childhood gives rise to, in many cases, unhealthy dependency relationships, which end up feeding back to the apprehensive personality of the individual. In other words, you're going to experience a lot of anxiety doing this. You just will. The fear of being abandoned ends up coming true in many cases because you're so anxious, you're creating an untenable environment for the people around you. It's very difficult for a relationship to grow stronger and deeper in a climate of emotional dependence or control, mistrust, or jealousy. She goes on to say, in the dynamics of human interrelationships, it is perfectly normal that during each stage of life, old acquaintances disappear and new friends come. People move in and out of our lives, guys. It's a fact of life. But people who have the abandonment syndrome cannot understand this. It hinders their understanding of the reality that people come and go in our lives. And it devastates them. It's absolutely devastating, and it is very negative, and they say, I'll never trust anybody again, and I don't trust myself to choose people, and they all leave me. Is that true now, really? In your rational right mind, past the issues that we're talking about right now, you know that's not true. There are true friends that are always there. It's interesting because when you have this, you don't tend to see them. Okay? Maybe it's a friend like me that's trying to get you to look at your stuff and help you. And instead, you may say, I don't want to see them. They make me feel too guilty. They beat me up too much. Who's beating you up? I've never beat you up in your life. I just am telling you what I'm supposed to tell you for an hour and a half. And I tell you what I'm supposed to tell you in 2 hours of our session. That's my job. That's my job. I don't do that when we're talking on the phone and having a conversation as girlfriends. Come on, guys. But we say it to ourselves. You see? We do it to ourselves. You're just assigning that role to me if you have done that, if I've made you mad. The original mother-child bond has been analyzed extensively. We'll probably learn more in another few years, but this is very exciting. But it sets the emotional guidelines for the future, your relationship with your mom. It is in childhood that the attachment bond takes place, and this determines all your relationships in your adult life. Behind an independent and secure adult is a dependent, cared for, and loved child. And I think that's just wonderful. But part of the parents' role, if they're good parents, is to make the child independent, you know? Okay. I want to go to the next article, which I haven't left much time for, have I? And this is 6 Signs of the Abandonment Schema. It's by Richard Brulette. Brouillette. He is a schema therapist. All right. Why don't I, because time is short here, I'm going to just skip to his 6 signs of the abandonment schema. Number 1, you don't believe you'll find love again, but if an opportunity comes up, you act desperate. Okay? So a belief that I'll never find love again, and then the opportunity comes up and you get very desperate for that love. It's such a contradiction in us, isn't it? Those of us that are suffering with abandonment issues. And of course, the desperation scares people to death, right? You should not be desperate. You should just be you. And this is somebody, of course, that does not trust love. Why would they if they have a parent like this, you see? Okay. Why wouldn't you love again? You're nothing but love, guys. If God is nothing but love and you are all God except for these issues that just simply clog the channel, you're the aspect of God you are, of course you find love again. You'll find it everywhere. And you'll give it away and get it back. What this leads to also is being more discerning, okay, about who you're bringing in. Because the interesting thing is, if you find the opportunity, they're going to reflect exactly how you are. So, is that a happy relationship? I don't think so. The thing is to heal yourself from this. So you're balanced and have a more mature idea of how to love someone. And, by the way, how to receive love. Number 2, you feel you don't have anyone in your life who cares for you. And as I said, sometimes you're pushing the most caring people away. It doesn't make a lot of sense. We should be willing to listen to everything. We should not be triggered by anything. If you are triggered by anything, if you're trying to avoid anybody, we need to do some work on that. Because you shouldn't. It's like if everybody's God and all the words are God, let's get straight. Now, that doesn't mean I want you to have a serial killer over to dinner. That's not what I'm saying, so don't take it into silly extremes. What I am saying is that we should not be afraid to live and to express ourselves and to love other people that are deserving of that love and to love people sometimes that aren't deserving of that love, quite frankly. You see, it isn't about whether they're deserving or not. It's about or not. It's about you knowing that you are love, isn't it? And the more you get your issues off, you'll see that's exactly who you are. Number 3, another concern about somebody with abandonment schemas is when people leave, the person with the schema is absolutely crushed and inconsolable. They just don't think they'll make it. Of course they will, if they let themselves. But the whole point is not to moon after this person or stalk this person. It's to work on the self, isn't it? It's to get rid of this so you're a better partner to yourself and others, by the way. Number 4, you get preoccupied with the worry that people are going to leave you, and you look for signs in small behaviors and interactions. Look, guys, nobody wants to be analyzed to death. We want to appreciate our friends as who they are. You don't want to be looking for things. And again, you're looking for things because you believe some very erroneous things. Like somebody's going to leave you, you're not enough, you'll never find love, nobody can love, that you don't believe that anybody can love you at all, that no love ever works out and none will. And oh my God, these things got to be challenged, kids. It's all about mom and dad. That's what it's about. Number 5, you get anxious and overthink when you don't hear from someone. So things like texting or somebody who doesn't answer the text back or doesn't call you back can absolutely drive you nuts. And you start doubting the relationship and doubting you. And here we are, I'm not enough again. And whoo, guys, why do we have to do that? It just doesn't make any sense to me at all once we put this on the table, that this is happening. Number 6, when you don't hear from someone, you react with surprising anger and resentment. And many times you start saying, well, they're just lousy people. You start making excuses when they're perfectly fine people. They may just be busy. Okay? We've got to, again, they're not the issue. The issue is your belief in abandonment. Don't get your mind off the subject. That's what you need to do. All right? Now, let's talk about reducing the pain and the self-sabotage of this. I think Brulette came up with some very, very interesting things. And that is, he says, understand your past. Stop making it better than it was. Or, by the way, worse than it was. And we do that to our own ends sometimes. Guys, we don't heal without self-reflection. It's extremely important. We have to see how something like abandonment has played a role in our lives, in our work lives, in our personal lives, in every aspect of our being. Understanding is going to help you get some distance from it and give you better self-awareness. We have to go into your story before years from now you can drop your story. It's just the way life works. If you're supposed to be a conscious individual, then you better be conscious about everything we're talking about. You see, there's a reason for this, right? And that consciousness is great wisdom in your life. Okay. Why do we not understand our past? Well, I know one woman glorifies her mother because she was a modicum of safe parent over her very evil brothers and father. And so the mother is the center of her universe. She wants a partner, but she won't get one without removing the mother from the center of the universe, because if the mother's the center of the universe, she's got a significant other already, right? Even though the mother's been dead 20 years. Guys, we got to wake up. Again, you should be in the center. You should be the sun. Okay. He goes on to say, note your triggers. Is it when someone is, in your opinion, a bad texter, When you don't hear from someone, when you feel like someone isn't paying attention, that's a real big one. When you're feeling cynical or pessimistic about love, are those your triggers to go feel abandonment all over again? The attention thing. I've done radio shows on that. You can go back. It wasn't too long ago, maybe a month or two ago that I did. Darlings, don't do that. I have a dear friend who is a client, and she has cancer. Well, that's an attention getter, isn't it? It makes you vulnerable to things. I'm not saying you're all going to get cancer. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying it makes you vulnerable to things when your only criteria for liking or not liking someone is getting attention. Gotta go, kids. Okay? The next one is look for what you're doing. Look for patterns in your behavior. Look at what you're doing. Noticing the words that come out of your mouth. Noticing when you feel anger and resentment, worry, or panic. When do you have these feelings? What is the circumstance? And how is that reminiscent of your childhood home? His next thought here is, for heaven's sakes, work on yourself. It could be hard for you to have faith in the world and have faith that the world will give you what you need if you have this schema. You had a hard time in your early days ever developing self-esteem, and you don't know what self-care looks like or what habits you should be doing and which ones are sabotaging you. If you have someone that is neutral to you and only wants something that is in your best interest, my God, that's what you need to help you work through this. That's why you need to work on yourself and find a good coach. We're certainly available. You get on my website, you can find some people. We're all available to you at certain times. By improving your ability to meet your own emotional needs, you can overcome this terrible insecurity and need to have relationships in your life that aren't good and invite inappropriate people in that you're doing and all the other things, or keep them out that you're doing. We simply have to wake up and see what we need to do to work on ourselves. And by the way, I think the ego child's mind blocks it. You know, the ego child's mind sends up propaganda to you. It says that the only reason you're alive is what it taught you about, and what it taught you to do was live within your limitations and have you believe in limitations. I don't think that's true at all, and I think the higher part of you is listening to a show like this so that you don't believe it. So let's get real about that. He goes on to say, use these expansive tools daily. Do a journal. I always hope people will do a journal with me. Write down the dreams you've had. Write down, and if you are not a dreamer, that's fine. But if you are a dreamer, it's telling me something. Write down what your triggers are. Write down who triggered you. Write down how you've been unhappy this week. Write down how it was like your childhood. Give me some stories from that time that illustrate that. You see? Self-reflection, guys. I got to have it. And most everybody does. That is going to help you. And it's fine if you say, I don't remember anything from your childhood. Therapy's going to actually help you remember things from your childhood. It's going to trigger some stories. And you're going to only remember what we need. So that's good, huh? I've never known anybody, unless somebody has a out-and-out terrible, terrible disorder, which is beyond me anyway, and should be handled by a psychiatrist or a psychoanalyst. We remember in my book everything we're supposed to remember to free ourselves from it all. Okay. the journal is a marvelous idea because it helps you express your feelings. And sometimes you don't even need to write that much. Sometimes you just need to keep a notebook and the barest minimum things that you can remember to tell me in a session. But you must do that. It's not about writing well at all. It's just about putting down the memories before you forget, because we are all too busy and we all forget. You need to do more than vent. I'm going to say you need to do more than meditation. I think it's marvelous for meditation, but guess what? People that are prone to fantasizing too much use meditation poorly. They'll use it to numb themselves out or to give themselves messages they want and not the real ones, you see? You can meditate and still be in the child's mind. Now, I love meditation. I think it's a marvelous tool, but only when you add it at a certain point when you're going to be emotionally honest with yourself. You are learning right now. You must learn to be emotionally honest. That's going to help you tremendously. He says, consider therapy. I'm going to ask you the same thing. Here's why. You're looking for a transformation here. And transformations don't just happen without work. Some sort of work. You may have to climb Everest for it and face death, or you can do it in the day-to-day loving way of therapy, particularly energetic therapy. Guys, don't be hard on yourself, he goes on to say, and I say the same thing. It's okay to be sensitive. It's okay to have intense feelings. It's okay to feel abandoned. We just need to get you on. Stop beating yourself up for feeling whatever way you're feeling. We just need to get you on with things, okay? We must, you keep in mind, we must embrace the child you were that didn't get any of this. That's the point. That kid needs an advocate, and you're it. It wasn't that your mother and father were it. It isn't that the next potential mate is it. You were it. Okay? Guys, thank you so much for listening. And if you will be kind enough to please get the word around about this show, send it to all your social media friends, please. You can, I think, do that on Blog Talk Radio. We are expanding our audience. We want to reach people with these really life-changing messages. Michelle says, I can see a change in my relationship with people, and it's much better. God bless you, Michelle. I'm so glad to hear that. And Judy, I'm so glad you listened today. Thank you, sweetheart. Now, if you'll be patient with me, coming and going for a little while, this has been kind of in the works for a while, but we are to the final weeks. And if I can have your prayers that this deal works and that we can come up with the money and all that kind of stuff for this new house, I sure would appreciate it, because it's a very powerful experience for us. And I feel very spiritual about changing homes. Really, I do. I think that we don't change our homes without changing inside. And I always look to be a good steward to the people whose house I am taking over, that loving energy. In this case, it is a loving energy. I add to. Okay, so God bless you all, and dear God, we ask now with our full hearts that you help these people see what the next step is in the gentlest and most loving way, and you open their lives to receive even deeper levels of you, because love is all they are. Thank you, Michelle, very much. Thank you all. I love you. I'll be here, at least I'm planning to be the following week, unless we're actively moving or something like that is going on. But I am taking next week off because there is a lot to do. And up here, where we live in the mountains, people show houses.
60 seconds.
People show houses forever, every day, okay? Take care of your sweet self. I love you. All right. See you soon, okay? And check my website. It'll tell you when we're doing things. And by all means, look at those old archival things, okay? You too, Jay. God bless all of you. Bye-bye.